back. I apologize for letting that break run so long, or letting that earlier segment run so long. We're talking here about America's decline into a position of political fascism. We're going to expand and talk a little bit more about that. This is part 2 of that first initial discussion, and I'm titling this Defining the U.S. Descent into Fascism. And I'm drawing corollary to 14 points that were created by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Lawrence Britt, who's done a lot of examination of different fascist regimes throughout history and throughout various nations, and identified a group of pointers, if you will, that pretty much identify where the nation leads, or what leads a nation into fascism. These are identifying characteristics that pretty well explain how one issue or another is defined. Our 7th section is obsession with national security. And this is fear is used as a motivational tool by the government over the masses. And the most ardent supporter of big government has got to admit that we have reached the antithesis of an obsession with national security and the idea of fear being the motivational factor used. I mean, we're told that all of this NSA spying and all of your emails being monitored and your telephone calls and your Facebooks and your social media, all of your information related to the data hub and all of that is acceptable. And it's acceptable because we need it to keep us safe, or they need it to keep us safe. With all due respect, I would disagree with that completely. The truth of the matter is, Americans have an infinitesimal risk of being killed in a terror attack. I mean, to be honest with you, statistically, you have a better chance of being struck by lightning twice in the same day than you do of being killed in a terrorist attack in the United States of America. I'm not saying that it can't happen, and I'm not saying that there won't be more of them in the future. I am saying that this issue and this obsession with national security is not outwardly projected. It's outwardly and inwardly, equally inwardly projected. Religion and government intertwined. This is bullet 8. Governments in fascist nations tend to use the most common religion in the nation as a tool to manipulate public opinion. Religious rhetoric and terminology is common from government leaders, even when the major tenets of the religion are diametrically opposed to the government policies and actions. While I wouldn't say that, because we do have the separation of church and state principle here in the United States, and we don't have a state-sponsored religion, if you will, the twist on that is a little bit different. What we see is, and I've done entire programs about this, and I've put up all kinds of stories about it, what we do see is how government utilizes religion and religious organizations to act as a leader, if you will, within the community. So we have things like the Department of Homeland Security's clergy response teams. Now, the clergy response teams are actual training episodes that are held by the Department of Homeland Security for clergy. And their goal is to get clergy to keep their congregations calm in the event of civil unrest, and to follow along the government principle. I mean, their argument is simple. Government's in charge. They're going to get this straightened out. We're just going to be quiet and move along and keep up, and we're not going to make any waves until they get this thing straightened out. With all due respect, I don't think that is the church's job, nor do I think it's the government's job to impose that upon churches. We also see the idea that religion is being overly compensated for, in a politically correct sense, in the idea that, we have to trounce Christianity but raise Muslim or Islam up and raise up, I mean, the argument there is and I don't want to take a position one way or the other on anybody's religious beliefs. You're entitled to whatever you want to believe. But I think it would be very difficult to deny the fact that the concept of Christianity as the primary religion in the nation is being suppressed or depressed, while simultaneously the opportunity for those who would want to practice an alternative religion is not being overly promoted. We're seeing the almost an obsessive approach to that. 9, corporate power is protected. Wow, that one is very clear. I'll read you the bullet. The industrial and business aristocracy of a fascist nation often are the ones who put the government leaders into power, creating a mutually beneficial business-government relationship and a power elite. I have a blog I used to create, in which I've now forwarded to America's Voice Now. It was called Corporatocracy. And a corporatocracy is essentially fascism in its truest sense, in the sense that corporations essentially own and control in our case, the Congress. They make the decisions. They employ the Congress to follow their best interests through laws. And when the general population discovers that, that things are unfair, i.e. the bailout, let's take that as an example, and they begin to gripe about it, the government is forced to use its police power to suppress that citizenry from going after or barring or blocking these large corporate entities from gaining the benefits that they've effectively already through bribery paid for, right? So in this case, what we're talking about is corporate power and it's very clearly protected. I mean, the idea that, the idea that corporations hold such sway over our electoral process in this nation is completely out of sync with what our founders had originally envisioned for the nation, much more so than most Americans would even want to admit to. I mean, the idea that a corporation has First Amendment rights and yet can't be prosecuted in a criminal aspect, because how do you put a corporation in jail? You can't. So on one hand, they call a corporation a physical entity that has all the First Amendment rights that you have. And by the same token, they then turn around and say, but this corporation does not have the ability to be prosecuted and held accountable for its actions. Wow, that's a pretty bold and blatant claim. You can't have it both ways, right? The corporate power is protected in this country. There's absolutely no denying it. When we look at things like the Monsanto Act, which was recently passed by my own senator, it was sponsored, written by Monsanto, handed to the senator, and he basically got it approved. The Monsanto Act is a perfect example of this. For the first time in the history of the United States, Monsanto has been given, and this will blow you away if you're not aware of it, Monsanto has been given immunity from civil and or criminal prosecution if their products turn out to be proven that they are dangerous to public health. To make matters even worse, the Monsanto Act actually prohibits Congress from passing any legislation that would further prohibit them from putting their products out there. I mean, it's unconscionable that they are barred and immunized against criminal and civil prosecution, and for all intents and purposes, they are given the ability to subvert Congress from taking action to prohibit them in the future. That is an unheard of protection for a corporate entity. And your representatives and your elected senators have voted for this. By the way, this is a Republican concept, not a Democratic one. So, and every effort to expose Monsanto's products or genetically modified products in your food supply have been rejected and fought down and paid for essentially by corporate money. You have a right to know what's in your food. That's a basic right of humanity. And irrespective of what anyone else thinks, you have a right to know what's in your food and then make a decision appropriately as to whether or not you want to feed yourself and your family that product. Labeling, truth in labeling, is a simple thing that Americans have been trying to push through for many years. Many nations around the globe have barred Monsanto and genetically modified products in general, from not only Monsanto but many of the others, from use in their countries at all. And yet the United States is allowing it to go full swing, and we've got plenty of empirical documentation and studies that show that genetically modified products are dangerous to human consumption. So that's a perfect example of how corporate power is protected in this nation. 10. Labor power is suppressed. Because the governing power of labor is the only real threat to a fascist government, labor unions are either eliminated entirely or are severely suppressed. In this case, I'm going to turn the tables on this one a little bit, because labor has been a strong force in this nation for many, many years. Labor unions are it's not that they're being suppressed. It's that they have been coerced and they've been compromised, and they are on the side of the organization. But yet, when it really push comes to shove, and you've seen this in the Obamacare debacle over the past 12 or 18 months, the labor unions actually are getting shafted. In other words, they're used as a pawn to attain a specific agenda or goal, and then once they've achieved that goal, their usefulness is over and they're discarded. And so we're seeing that where we do see labor power is suppressed, although not actively. It's more in a passive sense. Item 11, disdain for intellectuals and the arts. Fascist nations tend to promote and tolerate open hostility to higher education and academia. It is not uncommon for professors and other academics to be censored or even arrested. Free expression in art and letters is openly attacked. In this case, again, I point to the same concept that, like labor, intellectuals or higher education has been, for all intents and purposes, co-opted. It's been corrupted and it's been compromised. Most of the universities in the United States are already bear this ultra-left-leaning agenda. But again, they're being used as pawns because they are promoting this ultra-left agenda. And at the same point in time, when their usefulness has expired, they'll be discarded. So while I can't say that there's actual disdain for intellectuals in the arts, I think the general concept of how that's used is evident. 12. Obsession with crime and punishment. Under fascist regimes, the police are given almost limitless power to enforce law. The people are often willing to overlook police abuse and even forego civil liberties in the name of patriotism. There is often a national police force with virtually unlimited power in fascist nations. Okay, we talk about a police force that has almost limitless power. First and foremost, we see a compendium of laws that are almost unintelligible, and they are so overlapping and so convoluted that even lawyers and judges can't figure them out. Secondarily, we clearly are obsessed with crime and punishment. The United States currently has 25% of the world's population of inmates. 25%. They hold 1/4 of all the inmates globally. And yet, we are only 5% of the global population. So there's a significant disparity in the amount of people that are currently in prison versus those who are actually part of our overall percentage of the global population. Secondarily, we have these draconian sentences for the most nonsensical crimes. A perfect example is and it's being modified now somewhat, but the idea that when you got caught with a gram of crack, that you could be that was worth 100 grams of powdered cocaine, and you were sentenced based on a 100-gram possession because they were saying that crack cocaine is concentrated. And so you get caught with 10 grams of crack cocaine, and you get a sentence as if you got caught with 1,000 grams of powdered cocaine. It's a 100 to 1 ratio. So when we talk about that kind of abusive crime and punishment, and there's no denying, I mean, the vast majority of these people who are in our prison systems are drug users and drug related. And yet we see an example where the informant system is used to find all the low-level players, and then because the informants are actually the high-level players, those are the real pins, if you will, in the overall criminal organizations, they get these shortened sentences. I can't express to you how many times the guy who was actually the kingpin got 5 years, while all of the street guys who are actually just the distributors out on the street selling the stuff to the users in the street, those are the guys who get 10 and 20 and 30 years for a gram of crack. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape or form, by the way, that drugs are a good thing. They are a plague in our society. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I advocate that we end the war on drugs, and I would rather see the money spent towards the rehabilitation of those drug users. I would rather see the money spent more wisely and in those areas in our country where we're in true need. I would rather see less nickel and dime type of enforcement and revenue raising, if you will, by tickets and the like. And I would rather see that money used more appropriately for actually going after real true criminals. These are the guys on Wall Street and in Washington D.C. itself, in your state capitals. I mean, how did a guy like Corzine from MF Global have billions of dollars disappear, and yet he's never even been charged? I mean, it's ridiculous. They've declined to prosecute, right? We just had Jamie Dimon was settled for I apologize, it's $13 billion settlement on a fraud charge. Well, if you defrauded your investors out of literally billions and billions of dollars, you would end up in prison for that. But, he's the head of a too big to fail bank, and so therefore he gets a pass. I mean, the obsession with crime and punishment means punish the lowly and allow those who are the corporatocracy's bosses to escape punishment and all. Police are given almost limitless power to enforce law. That is the truth. Your Fourth Amendment rights are violated every day. The Cato Institute has done a great job of developing, and Bradley, I can't think of his last name now, he's written a group of books about how law enforcement and the militarization of law enforcement and their tactics are basically committing untold and unspeakable crimes on the American people when they, do these no-knock warrants, bust in, they find out it's the wrong house, but in the meantime, they shoot the guy who comes out with a, little old grandpa who comes out with a shotgun to defend his home. They shoot the guy, nobody's punished, nobody's prosecuted, and it turns out that they just had the wrong house. Wow. I mean, those types of things are happening every day in our nation, and it's unfortunate. It is part of this idea that the United States and the population are constantly being indoctrinated with the idea that you never question authority, you never question the police, you may not question. You do as you're told. There is often a national police force with virtually unlimited power in fascist nations. I hand you the Department of Homeland Security. Ladies and gentlemen, they have unlimited wherewithal, unlimited resources, and unlimited power. You've got fusion centers in the United States of America that are spending untold and ungodly amounts of money and turning up not a single straw of evidence to find anyone guilty of anything in reference to the idea of terrorism. We're using terrorism as an excuse to institute the police state. The real terrorists, unfortunately, are those who are implementing it. Rampant cronyism and corruption, bullet 13, and we're almost done. I'm going to try to wrap this up before 9 o'clock. Rampant cronyism and corruption. Fascist regimes almost always are governed by groups of friends and associates who appoint each other to government positions and use governmental power and authority to protect their friends from accountability. It's not uncommon in fascist regimes for national resources and even treasures to be appropriated or even outright stolen by government leaders. You see that in third world countries. The Marcoses are a perfect example in the Philippines, right? Where in Libya with Gaddafi, where these people abscond off with literally tens of billions of government treasury money. Where we see it in play here in the United States is a little bit more tame, but we do see a constant round robin of the government and their friends and cronies and supporters in this constant round robin. I'll give you an example. Every Treasury Secretary that we have, and in modern history, every Treasury Secretary has come from one of the too big to fail banks. You've got Jack Lew, you've got Bernanke. All of these people come into the Treasury, or they come into government office, and they come from, J.P. Morgan Chase, they come from Wells Fargo, they come from, all of the big banks, Goldman Sachs. After they're done with their, quote, public service, they go back into the investment banking industry, and they are given these massive bonuses for, the money they lost during the 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 year term that they served publicly. I mean, it's a joke. And when you look at things like the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department, which work hand in hand to basically strip America of its wealth, you have to recognize that there's absolutely no denying that these investment banks and these too big to fail organizations are actually pulling a lot of the strings. In fact, they're the owners in many cases of the Federal Reserve System. They are the member banks that make it up. Federal Reserve, remember, is a cabal of private bankers. It is not a federal agency. It's not affiliated with the federal government in any way, other than they have been given the wherewithal and the ability to negotiate treaties on our behalf, to determine how big our money supply is going to be, to set interest rates and affect unemployment and things like that. But they are a private organization, and for all intents and purposes, they are immune from any oversight. Congress calls them in every once in a while, and you'll actually hear people like Ben Bernanke actually say to them, we're not going to tell you what that is because we don't answer to Congress. I mean, Jefferson was very clear about things like that if we allow central banking to run rampant in our nation, that we would, for all intents and purposes, lose our nation. And we have certainly done that. The cronyism and the corruption in our government is clear and plain and obvious for all to see. We have Congress people, whether they be in the Senate or the House, who go into office as regular Joes. They've got some, limited middle-class wealth, and they remove themselves from Congress at some point in the future, literally worth, untold sums of money. Congress only pays $175,000 or $195,000 a year. And so I get it. You get a lot of perks, but you don't get quite that many perks. I mean, you can't, even if they save their entire paycheck and they spent no money while being in Congress, they wouldn't be able to build up the kind of kitties that they walk out of there with. Then they get these, wonderful pension funds that are completely out of context with the functionality of their job and their actual responsibility levels. We do see protection of friends from accountability. Perfect example is John Corzine and the MF Global scandal. Jamie Dimon and the fact that he was able to pay $13 billion in a settlement. And, okay, we got our cut. You guys can move on. I mean, we've got a government that literally says it's okay for you to produce fraud as long as you give us a cut. HSBC Bank is another perfect example, laundering hundreds of billions of dollars. And they settle for the government's cut, and everybody walks away scot-free. Nobody goes to prison. Nobody loses their job. It's unbelievable. The same thing with the IRS scandal. Nobody's still been fired for that. I mean, it's ridiculous. Fraudulent elections. This is the last point, and we're gonna tap off or close this off before the 9 a.m. hour. Sometimes elections in fascist nations are a complete sham. Other times, elections are manipulated by smear campaigns against or even assassination of opposition candidates, use of legislation to control voting numbers, or political district boundaries and manipulation of the media. Fascist nations also typically use their judiciaries to manipulate or control elections. We don't have anything so blatant and obvious as what we see in dictatorial nations. What we do have, however, is scenarios where we utilize gerrymandering to manipulate congressional districts so that someone cannot get, an incumbent can't be voted out. They move the territory and the boundaries upon which their constituents are located so that they make sure that they encompass these most. I mean, if you ever look at some of these congressional districts, they look like a Rorschach test. We also see a lot of voter fraud, and we see dead people voting and people who are no longer on the voter rolls, people double voting, people triple and quadruple voting, vote often and vote early. We see that mostly on the progressive side of things. In addition to that, this calls into question the idea that there in the latest presidential election, we had entire precincts and districts where 100% of the vote was cast for Barack Obama. Now, I mean, I get it. In some of these are minority districts, and people will argue that, well, this is a minority district, and they voted based on color or based on financial issues, based on voting out of the largesse of their pocket because everybody there is on disability or is on food stamps or on EBT or on welfare. 100%? This didn't happen once. It happened in dozens of precincts and districts around the nation. The odds of that happening are almost astronomical. The odds of 100% of a precinct going for one person over another are virtually, you have a better chance of jumping over the moon with sneakers than you do of getting dozens of precincts around the nation to 100% vote for one candidate. 100% of the vote. Not a single vote was cast for Romney in that last election. It happened again. It happened in the previous election in 2008 with McCain. So you've got to wonder. And then, by the way, we've passed our voting counting off to a French company, which, admittedly has some very, very nefarious ties. I invite you to go out and do your homework and take a look at that. But when we look at the issue of fraudulent elections, I don't think anyone here can deny, if they're going to be intellectually honest now, that we do not have a significant voter fraud problem. When you've got secretaries of state who are refusing to purge the voter rolls of dead people, we got a problem. So what I'm trying to draw here in this exercise and in these two show segments is the fact that this does in large part define our descent, the United States' descent into a level of fascism. We're not sliding into socialism, folks, and we're not sliding into communism. We're sliding into a unique form of fascism. And with all due respect, we're seeing the crackdown now on the general populace. When we see things like your First and your Fourth and your Fifth Amendment is being suppressed, when your free speech is being suppressed, when your ability to worship in the way that you choose is being suppressed, when we've got press who wants to actually go out there and blow the whistle, but they are being suppressed. They're being investigated. When you have an administration that has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all previous administrations prior to Barack Obama's ascendancy combined, there's something seriously wrong with that. There's something desperately wrong with the fact that this administration is on a hunt for those people who are whistleblowers. And, if you look at our constitutional basis and foundation for what our nation is founded or built upon, it's undeniable that our founders intended for this nation to have the ability and individuals who were in a position of authority or insight to be able to come forward and say, what's being done here is categorically wrong, and it's unconstitutional in its foundation, and therefore I'm exposing it so that the people can be aware of it and bar it before it becomes tyrannical. Wow. And yet we've got an administration that is on an active hunt and expends extraordinary resources, both financial and personnel, to identify and suppress whistleblowers. I posted an article up on our Facebook page this morning in reference to the fact that Benghazi and the witnesses to Benghazi have actually been, this whole Benghazi thing is so suppressed, they're changing their names and making them sign non-disclosure agreements. It's really bizarre in our society for that kind of thing to happen. For people to be moved physically, for their names to be changed, and for the Department of State to withhold their names from Congress as an investigatory agency, who the Department of State theoretically must answer to, for them to be able to bar for the Department of State to be able to bar Congress from knowing who the witnesses were and actively hiding those witnesses, something is desperately wrong. We saw the same thing in the Fast and Furious scandal, in which the United States Department of Justice was, and let's be honest, Congress actually found Eric Holder to be guilty of criminal and civil contempt for refusing to provide the information. Now, you may think it was a witch hunt. I don't really care. But when you have when you have an executive office, the president's office, who steps forward and says, I'm placing this under executive purvey, and you are not entitled to see that under executive privilege, that's a cover-up. Period. Plain and simple. Okay. That wraps up our segments on parts 1 and 2 on defining the U.S. descent into fascism. I appreciate it. I know that took us a lot longer than we wanted to cover today. Please feel free and confident to visit our website. We've got a website where you can learn more about America's Voice Now. It is americasvoicenow.org. We also have a Facebook page out there, which we'd like you to visit. We post a lot of stories up there, and even if you're not a Facebook user, because it's a public page, anyone can visit it, and you can see the stories. If you're not a Facebook user, you won't be able to comment, but you'll be able to at least read those articles, click on those links, go to those stories, and learn to use your critical thinking skills to identify and read both sides of an issue. Then take that information and formulate your own opinions, because that's what's critically important. Never parrot someone else's, always formulate your own opinion. And you're only going to do that by reading stories that agree with your bias and disagree with your bias. I encourage you to read. Don't watch media. I mean, you can't avoid it in some cases, but don't let that be your sole source of information. Read. And I encourage you to read things that ordinarily you're discouraged from reading, like the Federalist Papers. Why does no one in Congress talk about those? Because, to be honest with you, they don't want you to read those, because if you read those papers, you're going to recognize that our founders were calling them tyrants and calling them out, declaring that they are operating in treason, open treason. They don't want you to read that stuff. Now, I don't want you to just read the Federalist Papers. I want you to not only read the Federalist Papers, but the anti-Federalist Papers. It's available online, and it's free. You don't have to do much of a search. Go into your browser and simply type in Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers. You will find that they are available for you to download. I encourage you to print them out, read them, understand it. If you don't, by the way, and if you have a hard time with the older language, Mary Webster has translated them into the Federalist Papers. Modern English, she has a second edition out there. It's a very inexpensive book. She's well known for this work, and she basically expands on the Federalist Papers, turns them into modern English so that they're a little easier to understand. I've read large percentages of this. I encourage you to read it in conjunction with the Federalist Papers, so that you're getting their original statements and then the translation. And educate yourself, folks. That's what we're here for, to educate and inform, to motivate you to grassroots activation. Because if we don't save this nation, no one will. Okay. Thanks for joining with us this morning. We're going to jump into our fourth topic about an IRS leaker who's been ID'd, but that same law that he violated to expose the information related to the National Organization for Marriage is the same law that's protecting him from being exposed. Talk about a dichotomy. We'll address that in 1 second when we come back. We're going to take a hard break. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here. You can join us every day from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. Central Time. You can catch the show live. You can also find it on our website afterwards, posted as a podcast. You can find it on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. Those addresses are americasvoicenow.org, facebook.com/America's Voice Now, and our last location, which is our YouTube channel, at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. If you can remember the phrase America's Voice Now, you can find us. We'll be right back.